This is Think Energy, the podcast that helps you better understand the fast-changing world of energy through conversations with game changers, industry leaders, and influencers. So join me, Dan Seguin, as I explore both traditional and unconventional facets of the energy industry. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're coming clean about what clean energy could look like in the near future. That's right. And with the help of our guests, we're going to define what clean energy means, specifically for Canada and the future of electricity. There is a rising pressure around the globe to transition away from fossil fuels, eliminate greenhouse gases, and challenge the status quo when it comes to pollution and tackling climate change. What does that mean for Canada and our place in a clean energy world? Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to cleaning Canada's energy sector, particularly when it comes to transportation and heating of our buildings. But there's more to it than just that. There's renewable energy revamping and expanding the electricity grid and conserving energy. Not to mention innovation and technology that doesn't exist yet, that will all play a role in getting us to Canada's net zero targets. So here's today's big question. Can Canada affordably and realistically accelerate its transition to clean energy in time? Our guest today is Merran Smith, founder and Chief Innovation Officer at Clean Energy Canada, a leading think tank advancing clean energy and climate solutions. Merran has won numerous awards for her work and also serves as co-chair of the BC government's Climate Solutions Council. Okay, Merran, let's kick things off by telling our listeners about yourself, your work, and what Clean Energy Canada is.
Yeah, so I'll start with Clean Energy Canada. We're a think tank based at Simon Fraser University's Centre for Dialogue. And we focus on solutions to accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy. And so what do we actually do? We do think tanky things like analysis and policy advice. But what makes us really different is that, one, we focus on the solutions, not the problems, all about solutions. Two, we really like to bring together business, industry, unions, get everybody in the room and see if we can get consensus around the advice to governments so that they can move solutions forward faster. And thirdly, what we do is we do a lot of talking to Canadians about the energy transition, how it links to jobs, to a strong economy, and more affordability. And so we think of ourselves actually as a do tank, not a think tank. And myself, I'm a fellow at Simon Fraser University. I founded Clean Energy Canada. I'm now moved on. I'm no longer the executive director. I'm the chief innovation officer. And I've been asked over the years, the last 10 years doing this work, to co-chair a number of climate and energy advisory bodies for both the federal and the British Columbia governments. And I think that's because I have a pretty long track record of bringing together unusual allies around solutions to environmental, energy, and economy problems. So that's a bit about me.
Now, I'm somewhat curious. How does Clean Energy Canada define clean energy? Is it in relation to zero emissions, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, so for us, we talk about clean energy spanning both energy supply, so renewable electricity, for example, solar, wind, thermal, but also demand. And so our definition of clean energy includes, as I said, renewable electricity generation, but also energy storage, energy transmission, energy efficiency, and any of the technologies or services that decarbonize transportation, buildings, industry, and other polluting parts of our economy. So we have a fairly large definition of clean energy. And it really, when you look at it, that is what energy is all about. It's not just about making the energy, it's about how you use it and the technologies so that you can use it more efficiently.
Clean Energy Canada has been advocating for climate action since 2010. 12 years in, what are 3 positive changes that have made the biggest impact in Canada? And what is one that has hindered success?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, the 3 positive changes that I see is one, the costs of these clean energy technologies have dropped significantly. So, the solutions are cheaper. Secondly, is that we've really moved past the climate debate in Canada. And thirdly, is electric vehicles. And I just want to talk a bit about each of those, if that's okay. So, the cost of clean energy technologies, many people don't understand that over this last decade, the cost of solar has dropped yet again. It's dropped another 90%. Over this last decade, the cost of batteries, which are the heart of an electric vehicle, have dropped about 90%. Wind has dropped about 40%. And so, a dozen years ago, Clean Energy Canada was talking about this is coming. We need to prepare. Canada needs to be aware as an oil and gas producer. We need to be looking at this clean energy transition. But now it's here. These technologies are ready for prime time, and the economic opportunities are there to create jobs here in Canada around those clean energies. So that's significant. The second one is I think we've all lived through and seen in the news this debate about whether Canada should be acting on climate, whether it's real, whether Canada has any responsibility, whether it's feasible. And that's now become a real global conversation. And there's a clear message globally that we need to act now. And we've had over this last 6 years a federal government with the leadership that's aligning with those global efforts to act on climate. And in fact, this federal government has created the first climate plan that Canada's had to meet our climate targets. And they're now really putting it into action. And so that's been a significant and positive shift that we're actually moving to action. And thirdly is around electric vehicles. And, I just have to say them specifically because, from my observation, they really show Canadians what the transition looks like. It kind of looks like what it used to be, an electric vehicle and a gas-fired vehicle. They look pretty similar. But people are seeing how much better they are, that they are more affordable to drive. And especially with today's price of gas, if you're plugging in and charging your car, your Chevy Bolt and getting 400 kilometers for somewhere, depending on where you live in Canada, $5 to $10 versus what it's costing to fill up your car, that's significant. So electric vehicles and how fast they have come online, how we have seen the manufacturers shift to go from we're resisting this to this is the future. We want to be out in front and competing to be the ones who are going to be producing them. So that dramatic shift, it's really showing how we can link this decarbonization, climate action with the economy, that our industries can be successful and that we can really move forward towards net zero, towards decarbonization, towards cleaner energies, and continue with a strong economy if we do it right, if we act now. And I guess lastly about electric vehicles is for anybody who hasn't gotten in one yet, you really should because they're pretty fun to drive. And that's what we want this energy transition to be. We want it to be make life better. And I think electric vehicles are just one way that people can see how, once you get over the hurdle of purchasing one, it does make life better, cleaner air, more affordable to drive. Now, you asked the other question, what's hindered success? And I would say what's really hindered Canada's movement on all of this has been the debate and the governments that have really ripped up climate action or refused to move forward on climate action. And that's created uncertainty. So we've seen various governments in Ontario, in Alberta, federally, across the country. I shouldn't just name those provinces, because across the country, governments who come in and who are not willing to take action on climate and really want to stick with the status quo. And that really creates a lot of uncertainty for business and doesn't drive the change. I'm really hopeful that we're not going to see that anymore. Now that we've seen this new Inflation Reduction Act out of the United States, it is sending a clear signal that this is the biggest economic opportunity that there has been, in this generation, absolutely, to drive and build this clean energy economy. They are investing heavily in it. And we're going to see in the United States those kind of investments happening all over the country, in red states, in blue states. Blue collar workers are going to be, being employed in plants, white collar workers, rural, urban. This is going to be a massive, massive growth for industries and the economy in producing electricity, producing batteries, and producing all the component pieces towards them, hydrogen, retrofitting buildings. So there is a huge boom coming. And I hope that in Canada, we actually see our governments picking up on that as well and linking this decarbonization with our economic strategy.
Merran, what do you mean when you state that the clean energy transition is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Canada to build a resilient, growing, and inclusive economy?
Yeah, so we've just talked about how we're really seeing around the globe, the United States, but we've been seeing this in the EU, in the UK, and China, this, linking of their industrial strategy, their economic strategy to their economic strategies. And so Canada really has what it takes to make this shift as well, to, take action on climate, decarbonize, and really shift from fossil fuels oriented economy to a clean energy or renewable energy economy. So we have the natural resources that are going to be needed. Those metals and minerals, for example, we're going to be needing that steel, that cobalt, that nickel to be building the transmission lines, the solar panels, and in particular, the batteries, which are really the heart of a clean energy system. So Canada has what it takes. And then secondly, we've got the clean electricity. Our grid's about 83% clean or zero emission right now. We've got a skilled labor force. So that's what the opportunity is. It is going to be a massive effort for us to retool our existing industries and build some of these new industries, but we've got the potential to do it.
Next question now. What makes Canada well positioned to be a global clean energy leader?
So Canada's got the natural resources that we talked about, metals and minerals, forest products, agricultural products. We've got great solar and wind resources and a grid that's already 83% zero emission. We have great potential for green hydrogen. And we've got great trading relationships with the US as well as Europe and Asia. So we are positioned to be creating clean energy. And one of the things that we are uniquely positioned around are batteries. Batteries are going to be the heart of the energy system. So they're obviously the heart of the electric vehicle, but also large scale batteries are going to be what backs up the intermittent or variable wind and solar and renewable energies. They're going to be a part of the system as well. And so Canada's the only country in the Western world, it's actually the only democratically elected country that has all the metals and minerals needed to produce batteries. So in addition, we've got good, clean electricity to actually manufacture those metals and minerals and turn them into, refine them, turn them into cells, and ultimately batteries. So we've got the key components there. And that's one huge opportunity for Canada. And we're seeing, this federal government has been working with Ontario and Quebec and landing some significant battery company investments, GM in Bécancour this year, LG and Stellantis in Ontario. So that's some of the key parts of why Canada is so well positioned to be a clean energy leader.
Next question for you. What are the strategies you employ to achieve your mission to accelerate Canada's transition to a renewably powered economy?
Yeah, so one, I think that we work with businesses, industry, unions to understand what their needs are. We're positioned at the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. And so we use dialogue, bring people together, structure it so that we can have a deliberate conversation that gets us to advice for governments. So that's one of the strategies we employ. A second one is, we look around the world and we find out what policies are working elsewhere, what programs, what are other countries doing that's working, and what can we glean out of that and use in a Canadian context and feed that kind of information to governments and to industry about what they can do next. Because Canada's not the only one doing this, and there's a lot of countries that are ahead of us on this. So let's learn from them and Canadianize it. And then lastly, we really have an eye to bringing the public along with us in this conversation, ensuring that they understand the clean energy transition, exactly what does it mean, understand some of the policies when they get controversial, and understand what's in it for them. And right now we're seeing a public that has got a lot of insecurity going on with the global state of affairs, the war in the Ukraine, this energy prices escalating. There's a lot of misinformation going on. And so actually having the public understand and see how they fit into the energy transition and how it's going to make life better for them is, I'd say, a very important part of the transition. And so we do what we can. We actually study how to communicate with the public and study language, what works with them, what resonates, and how to get the stories to them that are going to help them understand this energy transition, what they can do and what they can support.
Merran, wondering if you could unpack for our listeners, what are some of the ways Clean Energy Canada has contributed to our country's progress in the last year or two?
Yeah, so we have been working hard over the last couple of years. And I'll tell you about some of the significant achievements that I think we've been part of making happen. So first is about electric vehicles, or zero emission vehicles, as they're called in some circles. We see these as a key part of the solution and one that is getting ready for prime time. They're a key part of the solution because 1/4 of Canada's carbon pollution is from transportation. So we've got to tackle this. And about half of it's from passenger vehicles, half of it's from trucks and buses. And so we've been working on both sides of that equation. And one of the things that has become the barrier has been supply of cars. At this point, people want them, and we're seeing the uptake of those cars, double and triple year over year. And so how do you get the supply here? And how you do that's through a policy called the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate that requires the automakers to sell them in Canada. And so that's one that we've been working on. We actually were successful in getting one in British Columbia. And I have to report to you that so far in 2022, 17% of new car sales have been electric vehicles. So that just far outpaces what people predicted. I think we were trying to get to 10% by 2025. We've blown through that. We've now increased our targets. because clearly British Columbians are ready to buy them. And there's similar types of stats from Quebec, who also has a zero emission vehicle mandate. The challenge for the rest of the country, if you're in Ottawa, you're probably going and putting your name on a list, and it's multiple years. You might not even be able to get on the list anymore because it aren't any cars. And so we need a federal zero emission vehicle mandate that requires the companies the automakers to sell electric vehicles in Canada, or they're penalized. So that's one thing that we've made good progress on and contributed to. One that I haven't talked much about that I'll mention here is about the steel sector, the cement sector, these heavy industries that are also heavy polluters. And, so that's another area we've been working on and looking for solutions. We looked at, much of this steel, cement, aluminum, it's all being used in the construction industry. So how do we get those who are building things and buying things to demand low carbon steel, low carbon cement, which will really help these industries, it'll push them to decarbonize. And so that program is called Buy Clean. The biggest purchaser of steel and cement and these types of things in the country is the government. And we've been working to get the government to commit to a Buy Clean policy. The really interesting thing is that the steel sector, the cement sector, the aluminum sector, these sectors are really on board to decarbonizing. This is globally happening. We're seeing all of these industries recognize that they cannot be emitting the scale of pollution they are right now. They've got to reduce that carbon pollution, get to net zero. And so, again, we're seeing progress on reducing emissions in that sector. And we're seeing, the United States and Canada have actually said that they are going to work together on this Buy Clean, so that both countries are pushing that they will only purchase lower carbon steel, cement, et cetera, for building our hospitals, roads, schools, and all those good things. So that's another one that I'd say we could say we've been involved with. And batteries, I've already talked about it. We've been involved in the batteries for the last few years, and bringing together that sector from the mining sector all the way up to battery producers and electric vehicle, the auto manufacturing companies like GM, and all the way to the recyclers, and working with government to get a battery strategy for Canada to really ensure that we lock in and land the most jobs and the most opportunities for Canadians across the country. And these would be jobs in different provinces and opportunities for different provinces, rural, urban jobs, et cetera. So it's a big opportunity, but Canada's got to act quickly if we really want to get the most benefits from it. And by the most benefits, I'm meaning we could be creating 250,000 jobs by 2030 in this sector, which would be good for the country and will help us as we're transitioning, out of other job sectors.
Okay, Merran. Are you able to expand on some of Clean Energy Canada's short-term goals?
Yeah, so I would say right now our top short-term goal is around public awareness and understanding how shifting to clean energy is going to help affordability for Canadians. I think this is critical and important because, this electrification, people are very sensitive to the price of electricity and increasing costs of electricity. And so there's a piece of work to shift to understanding what your overall energy costs are. So as we move off of fossil fuels, it means you're not spending as much on gas anymore, for your gas-fired car, but your electricity bill is going to go up. As you shift off of having gas to heat and cool your home and shifting to an electric heat pump, your electricity bill is going to go up. We did some research earlier this year, a report called The True Cost, looking at some of the top models of cars in Canada, what it costs to purchase one plus run it over 8 years. And we'll probably talk a bit more about this later, later. So just to say, having Canadians understand that this shift, while it's going to have some costs in the short term, is a more affordable and a better option for Canadians.
You recently contributed to a white paper with Electric Mobility Canada on how Canada can design an effective zero-emission vehicle mandate. I'm curious, what are some of your recommendations?
Yeah. So I'd say try to do this in a nutshell. So first of all is accountability. So we need to ensure that automakers are accountable and keeping pace with demand. And we need to do that with legally binding annual sales requirements so that they have to sell X% of cars that are electric and that there's serious financial penalties for non-compliance. And that's really the nuts and bolts of a good zero emission vehicle mandate. There's a whole bunch of details in there. Some provinces, like you mentioned, Quebec and BC, they already have one. So we just need to use this in provinces that don't have them. And then our other key aspect of the recommendations was speed. We need to really finalize this regulation next year so that it takes effect with model year 2024. There's really no time to wait on this, and we can see the demand for cars is there. We really need to be able to get them into the hands of people right now while they want them.
Now, for my first follow-up question, we all know that the lack of supply is a big issue when it comes to zero-emission vehicle sales. What's driving that? Are automakers prioritizing other markets where they're required to sell more EVs?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're seeing here in Canada. The majority of the electric vehicles are going to British Columbia and Quebec because they're required to sell them there. And they're going to other states in the United States that have similar types of mandates. California, one, but there's about a dozen down there. And so they're sending them where they need to. In the past, they have been making more money selling, SUVs, for example. Those bigger, heavier cars are where they've been making most of their profits. And so they're trying to get rid of those in Canada while they can. But this world is accelerating so quickly. I think once we get the zero emission vehicle mandate, that rule so that the automakers have to sell the cars, we're going to start seeing them arrive in Canada. And we've seen, the Detroit 3 have all been doubling and tripling their commitment for how fast they're going to start getting cars going and coming off the line. And I think we're going to only see that accelerate in the future. So I'm hoping that, it looks like the automakers are more and more committing to be producing the cars. So the next obstacle is going to be the supply chain and whether they can get the batteries and get the other materials to make them.
Okay, another follow-up question for you, Merran. Are there provinces in Canada that get prioritized for EV over others? Example, Quebec or maybe BC?
Yep, absolutely. That's why there's certain car makes and models that you can only get in BC and Quebec, and that'll be related to the zero emission vehicle mandate. They get there's a stick, and if they don't sell enough cars, they get penalized. So they make sure the cars are in BC and Quebec, and that's really the best selling feature for why we need this to be a national program and have a federal zero emission vehicle mandate.
Now, hand in hand with that, you convened a select group of industry stakeholders and other experts to develop a report on advancing a Canadian EV battery sector. What were some of the key takeaways from those consultations?
Yeah, so the report we produced, which you can find on our website, talks about this opportunity, and it is huge to produce batteries. We're talking upwards of 250,000 jobs by 2030 and $48 billion annually going to the Canadian revenues. So That's a great opportunity, but it's not going to happen without, creating a strategy to get there. And that is the top recommendation from this group of industry and other experts. The Canadian Battery Task Force is what they're called. The top recommendation is we need to have a Canadian battery strategy, which is going to ensure that we target and focus the investment dollars in the right place, that we get the workforce set up, because while we do have a great workforce in Canada, we're going to need more workers and with the right skills, and that we make sure that we get the infrastructure, we get the electricity, the clean electricity to the right places, and that we've got enough of it. We've seen almost every battery manufacturing plant that's set up so far has mentioned the zero emission electricity that you can get in Canada. And that's one of the reasons why they chose to build in Canada. And these are big global companies that are choosing to land in Ontario and Quebec so far. And so we need that kind of strategy to ensure that we can get the most out of this battery opportunity.
I like that. Okay. Let's move on. Can you tell us about your recent analysis that found electric vehicles are in fact cheaper, often by a lot, than their gas counterpart? What models were you comparing and what factors were considered?
Yeah, so we looked at some of the best-selling cars in Canada, things like the Chevy Bolt as the electric versus its gas counterpart, the Toyota Corolla, the Hyundai Kona versus the electric Kona, the Nissan Leaf versus the Honda Civic, etc. So we did this for a number of the top-selling cars. We looked at purchasing it, as well as operating it and maintaining it over an 8-year period. And what we found is that in almost every case, you were saving money. And we've had to update this because the price of gas has gone up so much. But the total cost savings of going electric range from $10,000 to $15,000 over 8 years. That's significant savings. And as you talked about, you notice that there's almost no maintenance cost for an electric vehicle, and that your cost of fueling is, so much cheaper. And this was before gas was at $2 a liter. So roughly back of the envelope, those savings are going to jump in, for example, the Kona to about $18,000 or more. A lot of people don't understand how much more affordable an electric vehicle is. And they look at the sticker price of buying a new car, and that's what turns them away. So we are encouraging people to really understand, look at the long term. And we know that not everybody can go buy a new car. I didn't buy a new car ever in my life till I bought an electric vehicle. I always bought used cars. But the savings are significant. And of course, the added bonus is the zero emissions. You're part of the solution and helping with climate change.
Okay, a follow-up question here. Were there any expectations here?
Yeah, so the Ford electric F-150, it was pretty close. Probably now, if we did it with the price of cost of gas now, you would actually be more affordable on the Ford F-150. We haven't gone back to it. The other thing to note on this is that electric vehicles are really holding their value. So if you're someone who likes to buy a new car and sell it in 8 or so years, your electric vehicle used car sales are much higher than when you buy a new gas-fired vehicle and then sell it off.
When it comes to the electricity grid, Canada is 83% emission-free and with lower electricity rates than many other countries. We seem to be in an enviable position, but in your report, underneath it all, your findings show that Canada may not be as prepared for a carbon-neutral world as we may think. Now, for the big question, why is that?
Yeah, we are ahead, but it's not just about getting from 83% zero emission to 100%. If that was the only challenge before us, it would take some work, but that's extremely doable. But this energy transition is really the wholesale re engineering of many of our supply chains, almost the entirety of the energy system that powers the economy. It's huge, and we are going to need to double the amount of electricity we produce by 2050 as we shift our cars, our homes, our businesses off of fossil fuels and onto the grid. So that's the main message of our report is, we have great opportunity here, but we need to double the size of the grid so that we are able to plug our cars and our home heating and cooling and our industries into that zero emission grid.
Okay, follow-up question here. What are 4 reasons Canada need to achieve 100% clean electricity supply, and what are some of your recommendations?
Yeah, so, first off, it's so that we can effectively combat climate change. And that's, top reason why we're doing this. It's also going to diversify and strengthen Canada's economy. As I said, companies are looking to be powered by zero emission electricity. We've seen those battery plants coming here, one of the reasons cited, and there's more opportunities as more of the world's industries really focus on how are they going to be net zero. For example, we see Walmart and Amazon. Those companies are looking for supply chains that are zero emission. They're counting their carbon, and that includes their transportation. So it's about making Canada competitive and ensuring that we are an attractive place because we can power our economy and our communities with clean electricity. The third reason is around the potential for Indigenous reconciliation efforts and clean energy ownership. I think this is a very exciting opportunity. There's already a lot of Indigenous communities that own or are partners in clean energy, and we can expand that as this moves forward. And then lastly is we've started talking about affordability on this podcast. And, once you get over the purchasing of the new technologies, it's really more affordable to be plugged into a zero emission grid. And that's going to create more certainty, more security around energy supply.
Merran, what are some of the other benefits to increasing Canada's clean electricity supply?
So, one, we need clean electricity to meet our climate targets. Secondly, it's around affordability. This is going to help make energy more affordable for communities. And then another benefit is clean air, of course. Once you shift off of diesel buses, for example, to electric buses, out of diesel trucks to electric trucks, you're really cleaning up air quality in cities in particular, but in all communities. And then there's another potential benefit. Canada, most people don't know this, we actually export 8% of our electricity right now to America. That brings in $2.6 billion. And the US has the same commitments around getting to 100% clean electricity grid by 2035. Theirs is a lot dirtier than ours. They've got a lot of catching up to do. And there's a potential for Canada that has an enormous wealth of potential for renewable electricity across the country. Places like, Alberta and Saskatchewan have incredible solar resources. We have wind opportunities, offshore, onshore. So there's potential for us to be investing in clean electricity, not just for our own needs, but as a immensely valuable export that's going to be in demand in the United States. And then linked to that economic opportunity is green hydrogen. We're hearing more about hydrogen and something that Europe's looking at shifting off of natural gas onto green hydrogen, which is made, with water getting split with electricity and turned into hydrogen. So that's a good clean energy source and something that Canada could also be a leader in.
Okay, tough part is over. We always end our interviews with some rapid fire questions. We've got some for you. Are you ready?
I am. I'm ready.
Okay, so for the first one, what are you reading right now?
So I just re-picked up a book that I read a number of years ago, The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. It takes place in Ireland starts in the 40s and follows the life of a boy, then a man, as he's going through really coming into his own and discovering himself. And it's just beautifully written, really great book.
Okay. What would you name your boat if you had one? Or do you have one?
Well, I lived on one for 11 years. And that boat was called Potential. But I thought about this. What would I name a boat right now? I might name it Unplugged, because it would be the ticket to just taking off and having some fun.
Who is someone that you admire?
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of Christiana Figueres. She was for a number of years the United Nations UNFCCC, which was the framework on climate change in the UN. She was the executive secretary there. She is just a fantastic climate leader. She is always positive. She continues to be optimistic in spite of all the challenges in this world, and she's always got a smile on her face while she continues to do this work.
Next question. What is the closest thing to real magic that you've witnessed?
Maybe 15 years ago, I used to work up in what's called the Great Bear Rainforest off the coast of British Columbia. We were taking a group of people out to go see the place and experience it, the beautiful ancient rainforest, an area the size of Ireland. And we were whale watching humpback whales, and they go around in a circle and they blow their bubbles and make a net out of it. And then they all go down and they come up in the middle. And so there was 4 of them doing this, and they come up in the middle. They make that net around a little school of fish, and they open their mouths and come up and scoop up all the fish. And we were watching them do that. And then suddenly I looked off the side of the boat, and there was all these little fish leaping out of the water. And suddenly the whales picked up our boat and lifted it out of the water. And so it was just amazing. And there they were. Then they just kind of sit around at the top. We could have just reached over and pat them. And then I was like, oh my God, I wonder if they're hurt. And as we sat there, they all sort of swam away, and they completely breached, came out of the water from tip to tail. You could see them all. They hadn't done this before, one after the other, all 4 of them. So you could see that they were just fine. And then they swam away.
Okay, moving on to the next one here. What has been the biggest challenge to you personally since the pandemic began?
Yeah, it's been this plethora of Zoom meetings, staring at a screen hours after hour. And I'll tell you that I zipped out and got myself a stationary bike. And so during those Zoom calls, everybody at first was laughing at me because I'd be kind of wiggling back and forth as I rode the bike slowly just to keep myself going. And now all kinds of colleagues have now purchased stationary bikes as well.
Okay, we've all been watching a lot more Netflix and TV lately. What's your favorite movie or show right now?
A number of months ago, my family and I went to see The Lost City with Sandra Bullock, just like a ridiculous, funny comedy. And I was laughing out loud. And I was just like, it was after the depths of COVID, it just felt great to laugh out loud at something that was just completely goofy and frivolous.
Lastly, what's exciting you about your industry right now?
It's the potential for the speed of change. Things are moving quickly, and it's that things can move quickly now. Technology is ready for prime time. The public understands that we need to take climate action, and governments and business are really seeing that economic strategy is so linked to climate action. They see them as one and the same. Decarbonization is what the economic future looks like.
Well, Merran, we've reached the end of another episode of the Think Energy podcast. If our listeners wanted to learn more about you and your organization, how could they connect?
Yeah, you can find us at cleanenergycanada.org. And you can also sign up on that for the Clean Energy Review, which is an email we send out every Monday morning that I hear from people in all walks of life, from CEOs and ministers to receptionists and friends who don't even work in this. It's got the top 10 upbeat, optimistic, solution-based stories of the week. You can scan it in 2 minutes, or you can click on things and dive into these things in more details.
Again, Merran, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you had a lot of fun. Cheers.
I did. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Think Energy podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening. And to find out more about today's guest or previous episodes, visit thinkenergypodcast.com. I hope you'll join us again next time as we spark even more conversations about the energy of tomorrow.